Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to have back on the show for a third time satanic ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse survivor, overcomer, and whistleblower, military veteran, former private contractor, anti-piracy operator, and bodyguard, prison and health industry reform activist, podcaster, and host of his own YouTube channel and blog called Survivor Story, men's trauma and sexual abuse advocate, and the wolf in the lion's den roaring in the face of evil, Daniel. For those new to this channel or who missed his unforgettable first episodes, here's a quick recap for all of you. Born into an expatriate family in Nigeria, Daniel's childhood shimmered with privilege, but concealing a chilling void of fear and neglect. Behind the wealth and high walls, unspeakable terrors haunted him, rooted in horrors he couldn't yet name. As a young man, he poured his fire into high-octane careers. Elite military service, private contracting in the Middle East, anti-piracy missions off Somalia, and guarding high-profile figures. Yet beneath his high-performing exterior, self-loathing, rage, and suicidal shadows gnawed at him, their origins a total mystery. Disillusioned by the greed fueling his military path, Daniel embarked on a spiritual quest, diving into personal development and somatic therapies with relentless passion. In 2020, his world shattered and yet reformed. Through holistic therapies, buried memories of childhood sexual abuse, including heinous organized abuses by multiple perpetrators, erupted in vivid, gut-wrenching flashbacks, plunging him into psychosis and paranoia. From the ashes of pain, Daniel forged a lifeline, forgiveness, not as an absolution for his abusers, but as liberation for himself. Initially resistant, fearing it betrayed fellow victims and survivors, he embraced it as a radical act of freedom. By severing ties and settling ironclad boundaries, he found safety to forgive from afar, transmuting resentment into love. Through grueling psychological work, Daniel wove his trauma into purpose, emerging as a warrior for healing. In parts 1 and 2 of Daniel's podcast appearances on this channel, we dove deep into his whole testimony, outlining his harrowing upbringing, his journey of remembering what he was programmed to forget, and his incredible path to freedom and healing that left all of us who listened in awe. On today's episode, we are going to cover some different aspects of Daniel's story that we haven't talked about yet, including an in-depth discussion on psychosis and paranoia, and navigating the extreme mental and emotional side effects that many survivors face when recalling memories, some of Daniel's personal artwork and the memories and inspiration behind them, and so much more. Now, through Daniel's podcast and blog under the name Survivor Story, he turns his pain into power, uplifting men's healing and amplifying survivors' voices. His mission is unyielding, to inspire, especially men, to break the silence around child sexual abuse. Daniel's words resonate like a battle anthem. Quote, "Every survivor is a hero. Set boundaries, forgive safely, and let love free you. Share your story. It matters. You can shatter trauma's chains," unquote. From a wounded boy to a warrior of forgiveness, Daniel's journey is a call to action for all of us to confront our pain, to reclaim our voices, and to ignite our lights. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you are interested in submitting a written testimony to be featured in a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020 at gmail.com, or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. Additionally, I've teamed up with a couple of my favorite brands to offer you guys exclusive discount codes on products I love, such as Rife Technology frequency machines and CZTL's premium methylene blue. You can find all the relevant links and codes along with other resources down below in the show notes. I've also recently started up a new YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I am now streaming new episode premieres from weekly. Turn on your notifications and join our loving community in the live chats every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Central Time. Thank you on the other side of the screen wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every single guest on the show. So, you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, walking miracle, man of God, content creator, passionate purveyor of truth, absolute warrior, and a man on a mission to set the captives free and to make the world a better and safer place for our children and for survivors. The one, the only, Daniel. Daniel, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's so good to see you again, to have you back on for a third time.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I just smile a bit goofy, just at all the wonderful goodness that is coming this way. So just thank you for such a beautiful introduction. And yeah, I just really appreciate you. Really appreciate you.
You're welcome. You're worthy of every word and then some. I hope there's a whole book written about you one day, and I'm sure there will be.
Thank
But
you.
in the meantime, we're really blessed that we get to learn from you on platforms like this and your blog, which I'm actually really excited we'll be talking about a little bit more. I think, writing and drawing, it gets such an
Yeah.
underrated reputation in society for healing. You don't hear many people who aren't survivors talking about these modalities. You don't really hear it being, promoted. But understanding how healing it can be in the different ways that we can express using these different modalities, I'm actually really excited to
Mm.
talk about your blog a little bit. So I wanted to kind of turn it over to you. I know we said we were going to actually start with some of your blog memories, and for people who are listening, if you haven't visited Daniel's website, I always link it below. It's at Survivors, www.survivors-story.com. And from there, you guys can get tons of resources. I'm going to bring it up in a minute. We've gone about it and talked about it in other episodes, but Daniel actually hosts a blog there where for years he has used his penmanship and his art, his own personal art, as well as AI and different ways to sort of portray visually on paper through words and photos, memories that he has relived and that he's actually recorded for us. So it's a really, really special blog. There's tons of entries. They're actually very long and they're very detailed. And I think if you guys want to learn more about Daniel and about specific topics, it's a really great space for that. So of course I'll have that link below, but we're actually going to be covering a couple of his blogs today, sharing some memories that are really relevant as far as sharing the artistic side of Daniel as well as his penmanship. And so I wanted to turn it over to you, Daniel, to maybe share the foundations of your blog, maybe how you got started with it, and we can bring these entries up and go through these memories and share your art.
Thank you, Emma. Okay, let's try and do it justice. So I started writing probably in around 2011, 12, 13, and I was going through my spiritual journey. I was involved in a spiritual community out in San Francisco. I'd also been doing a lot of mythological work, with like old stories, wild camping, time around a fire, fasting, wilderness rites, that kind of work as well. So I'd started having a lot of very vivid dreams. I'd started having a feeling of the land itself speaking to me. I'd I'd started processing and working through trauma without actually reaching the memories of the childhood sexual abuse or the satanic ritual abuse. So, but there was still a lot that I was working through. And I started writing blog posts based upon the dreams or based upon themes. One of the themes that all the way back then, so 2011, 12, 13, that was coming through was the theme of wolf. And it was a really strong theme. He was in my dreams. He was a protective aspect. And the first blog post I wanted to touch on was called "The Boy and the Wolf." So yeah, I'd really started connecting to what felt like a wolf-like essence that was within me, and almost like feeling a sense of an imaginary friend that would protect me or that would possess me and give me greater strength and faster reflexes in order to protect myself. And this is the first blog post we'll go through. So if it's okay, I'm going to read it. Before I do, actually, I'll just say to the viewers, my camera is here, my computer screen is here. So if I'm looking a bit off to the side, I apologize. But it's the best setup that I could get together for today. Um, so I'm going to read the blog post. The boy and the wolf sat down upon the rolling hills. The boy had hair golden white. Lit by the setting sun's rays, he had a cheeky smile and an easy laugh. He was happy. He dreamed of soon sitting with his friends once again. In the dream, one of them asked him, "Why are you not playing like you used to?" As if the friend had missed the boy from before. But the boy sat there not needing to, happy and full, listening, watching his friends. One of them said a kind thing to the boy, and tears sprung to the boy's eyes as he felt love blossom within. Then a couple of men walked past and sneered at the boy, at his gentleness, which had been looking to emerge for so long, like grass breaking and shooting forth into life around the garden's stony path. Jumping up and pacing, the wolf paced back and forth. Eyes became red as he grew in size as if possessed, speaking in a low, guttural, snarling growl. "Boy, I trust and see that you are becoming free, but know that if they shame you, if they hurt you for being true, then I will carry you away and set on them in rage and fury. My teeth will rend, tearing out their throats. My claw will flay their skin. I will devour them, their hearts and their flesh, taking their eyes last of all, so they must watch on as I destroy them, so they can know only darkness." The boy looked at his wolf and nodded, remembering older times when he had been afraid of the wolf's anger. Tears came to the boy, his eyes coloured like the shades of the forest filled with love. His heart remembered how his wolf, had protected him over the years. The small boy somehow now seemed larger than the giant wolf. He walked forward on earth and grass-stained feet and placed a tender hand upon the wolf's powerful shoulders. The boy kissed him there, and burying his face in the brown greying fur. The scent of the forest, the sea, the mountains greeted him. The scent of the beast's flesh, sweat, and blood filled him. The boy became the wolf, and the wolf became the boy. "If you ever need me," whispered the wolf, and the man burst apart and cried, grateful for who he was.
And here's some of Daniel's artwork. There was also a graphic at the top too that portrays this specific dream slash memory.
Mm,
I think I want to comment first of all, this is a beautiful post. The message is incredibly well articulated in such a short um, write up, but I also think it's extremely fascinating how you wrote this before you actually understood the full story of what you had gone through as a child, and even probably before you knew that you were dissociative or had parts, and that wolf was such a big part of your life. I think it's really incredible that you intuitively picked up a pen and paper, which is incredibly healing, and
mm.
connecting these different brain synapses and just processing trauma. I think it's amazing that that was what you intuitively did, you went right to the pen and paper instead of, maybe processing it and remembering it a different way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it was written in, I think, 2013. I'm going to touch on a couple of points from it, if that's okay, actually.
Please,
So,
yeah.
so one of the themes of my life has been being a very sensitive, a very empathic, and a very gentle boy. Um, but then really just the themes of that being kind of targeted and taken advantage of and ridiculed and being humiliated for that by bad men, by bad women. Um, so the theme here is just so core. It's just so core to who I am. And, you know, I've had experiences in my life where there has been trouble, as you know, as a grown man, and I have felt a bit wolfish, and I've dealt with situations that have required, unfortunately, a degree of violence to solve them. Um, but I can really look back over my life and feel as if Wolf has been there in my hour or my moments of need. And there was really something in this writing that just symbolized the work I was doing at the time. There was the integrating of where I was a bit separate between my anger and my tenderness. And it was really about trying to bring that together and integrating that together. And yeah, it was beautiful. You know, I often get a bit teary rereading this, but yeah, that's the first blog post.
It's beautiful how you were able to articulate that. And it's actually even more meaningful now hearing your inspiration behind it and kind of what you were going through at the time that you wrote it.
Mm, mm,
That makes total sense how there's sort of this emotional turmoil that's trying to come together and create cohesion, and you
mm.
see how that's done really beautifully in this particular write-up that you did. When you were drawing the actual artwork, did that come first or was that after you wrote the actual article?
That was done afterwards. I actually did this in hospital. There was an art therapy class there, um, so I actually did it there. So it's fairly recent artwork. But yeah, it felt really cathartic to do. And it was also at a point when I was in the hospital where I was going through the phase of questioning everything about my story and really questioning if anything was true, and then rebuilding bit by bit, trying to sort through the various memories and sort as if, okay, this is real. I think this was delusion. This is dream. This is something else, and trying to glue myself, rebuild myself after really getting to a point where nothing was true, nothing was real, and being in quite a distressed state. So it was a part of rebuilding myself, and reclaiming aspects of my story, in doing the artwork, actually.
Without the context of what you have now, when you originally drew it and wrote this,
Yeah.
what did you think this dream signified at that time without the context? Did you have any ideas of why this was like so powerful for you? Why this dream of all dreams stood out? Why you felt compelled to write about it? Was there anything that came to mind back then that you're reflecting on now and can sort of decipher and transfer into what it actually is?
Yeah, looking back on it at the time, I mean, I knew that in normal memory, my father had been physically abusive, had been a bit a bully, that I was very scared of him growing up. But without the sexual abuse there, I think I didn't really think like, why would I need to have Wolf? That wasn't really present. I just knew he was there. I just knew he was there, or I knew he was a part of me, and I was doing so much work in nature and feeling so connected to the land, and it really felt like a latent wildness, or as they talk about in mythic storytelling, they often talk about your wild twin. The idea being in mythology that on the stormy night that you were born, before you are born, there is a wild twin that's born before you, a raggedy-haired, long-nailed, sharp-toothed thing that the midwife throws out of the window on this dark, stormy night. And then you're born and you're given to your mother, and your life begins. But the idea being that through your life, there is this wild twin on the periphery of your vision that is dancing through life with you, trying to remind you of the promise you made before you came into this life, of trying to remind you of your forgotten wildness. And Wolf really was like my wild twin. It felt like he was calling me in the wild places of Dartmoor, or of the Black Forest in Germany, or other places that I went to. It just, it was as if I could and I'm not talking literally here, obviously, but as if he was in the periphery of my vision, calling me to walk barefoot, calling me to wander out into the land, calling me to sleep under the stars. Yeah, it felt like an integral part of myself I was reclaiming.
That's really beautiful. Is art and writing something that still to this day you find just as cathartic as you did back then?
Mm, yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm smiling because I've started writing a book, actually, mentioning books.
You
Um,
have.
I have, and I'm gonna base it. I mean, it's basically what we're talking about in this podcast, but I'm gonna write a book, a novel that is based upon my experiences, including the delusions, as if it was real, and to make effectively a fantasy story, basically, that has some truth in it, but that has some delusion as well. So I've started writing that, but that's feeling very cathartic, and um, it's just a really good way to get everything done on paper and to integrate it more deeply. Whether it becomes a bestseller, we'll have to see, but it feels like a good process at least.
That's incredible. Congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you.
That's I mean, to have your story in a book too is really helpful for doing publicity and media if people want to
Yeah,
learn more, if you don't have a lot of time to, share 5 hours or 6 hours of talking
yeah,
somewhere. It's a really great way to refer people to, here's what I want to talk about today. If you want to learn more, here's my book,
mm,
and to just kind of
mm,
immortalize that because we never know what can happen online. We never know what can be physically taken from us. But
mm,
a book circulated all over the world and, available for everybody is a way too to immortalize your story, which is really
mm,
cool. Even if it
yeah,
is fantasy and fiction, it's still a way that you can get your story, cathartically out. And,
mm,
like you said, there's going to be a lot of truth to it, even though it won't be nonfiction.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
That's incredible. And so we were going to go over another blog, the
We
Golden
were.
Ones.
Yeah,
I will look that one up.
I may actually just try and read this one or recite this one from memory, if that's
Sure.
okay. Or will I? Will I actually? Actually, I may just read it
Love this
actually.
art, by the way. This is absolutely beautiful. The colors and
Thank
hanging
you.
through it, stunning.
Thank you. Yeah, it was with quite limited materials, so the paints and the brushes that were available weren't quite. I would have loved to do it with oil, but it was. But thank you. Yeah, yeah, it encapsulates it. So I'll read it. I'll read it, but I may go off on a tangent maybe. So this is the Golden Ones, and this is from when I was reliving a series of memories from the first time that I was raped. Um, and during one of these memories, as I was somatically processing the physical symptoms of being raped, I experienced myself leaving my body or re-experienced myself leaving my body. And this is what I saw. So either this is delusion or this is something that I genuinely saw when I was a child. So let's give this a go. I relived this when I relived the first time I was raped about 4 years ago now. I won't say here what was being done to me, but I know from a smell that I gave off during the reliving that I was young enough to smell like a baby. At some point during the horror of it, I felt my soul leave my body and float around the room, looking down on my body and the adults around me. I became aware of them after a while as they gently, so gently guided me away and guided me up. They were tall and slender, golden and radiant as if made of light, features indistinguishable, elegant in their movements, and their language seemed to be that of music. Musical sounds sprang forth between them, and even as they moved, starlight seemed to follow. As they guided me in my soul child beingness so gently up into the sky, their arms and hands were interwoven and interweaved, making a basket for me of living light, living golden light. Higher and higher we went, higher, beyond the solar system, beyond the stars, until we came to a quiet place. Here there was an immense body of water stretching as far as the eye could see in every direction, and gently their music hushed to a humming awe, and we all began to lower towards the surface, the entire cosmos reflected upon the surface. Gradually, they bathed my body into the water, which had the consistency and felt like warm milk, but it was clear, crystal clear, like a lake in a hidden glade on a perfect star moonlit night. As I bathed there, held in those perfect arms, so I was soothed, so I was made right again, and so the pain left my soul. And then the noise of their language, their music seemed to change. More excited now, humming gently arose in intensity. And then at the far horizon, a dawn began. A golden sun started to rise, emitting such perfect warmth. And as this golden sun rose, so it also encroached upon the seemingly infinite lake, drawing closer and closer, rising higher and higher, until it was all that could be seen, all that could be felt upon my skin, which was not submerged. Perfect warmth, belonging, safety, home resonated through me. And then the sun engulfed us all, and I knew who he was, and I cried tears of joy. At some point, I returned to my body, but I remembered always, while I also forgot. I had to forget it all because it was so bad, but still it remained with me on some level, like an ever spark, reminding me of where I came from.
Oh my gosh, this is so touching. I think you touched on this memory very briefly in one of our interviews that we did
Mm,
and talked sort of about this experience, but hearing it in this way, so poetic, seeing the artwork that accompanied it, it really just adds so much context and contextualization to this memory, and just how
mm,
supernatural this experience was.
yeah. Yeah, and not I didn't have a frame of reference for it, at the time. I mean, I'm a Christian now, I hasten to add, and so I've got quite um an established, well-established ideology, but at the time I was much more spiritual. I didn't really have any preconceived ideas of what God was, although I had had experiences of God. But in reliving this, it was so palpable, it was so vivid, and I knew in the memory, I knew that that sun was God or was a part of God. I knew it was like some embodiment of God, and I just knew that. And he touched me. And then what was the water? I asked myself. And then the golden ones were angels or were healed and evolved ancestors. They were my guides, my protectors, my brethren. But it was such a powerful experience. And I still, if I think about it, although I've got quite a strong belief system now, I don't really know how to plug that in with my Christian beliefs, to be perfectly honest. I just don't. Um, I don't know if this was real. Maybe this was me already slipping into some kind of psychosis, or maybe this was some kind of disassociated state that I went into when I was being raped as a babe into some kind of um, fantasy. Maybe I was drugged and I hallucinated in some way, but it felt so real, Emma. It was so beautiful and it really stayed with me. And I had such a strong feeling of how deeply not only I was loved, but all of us are loved. And although there are millions and millions of us, and we're in the grand scheme of things, we're imperceptible. We're tiny little dots in not even a dust of sand in the whole of creation. But I just knew that we were held in his heart and he knew all of us perfectly and loved all of us perfectly. And that really came through with this memory. So it's probably a little bit confusing for me to try and plug that into put that peg into a hole at this stage of my life, to be honest. And I'm really open to it being delusion. I'm really open to it being psychosis, or I'm really open to it being some glimpse of eternity that I had as an incredibly young and vulnerable and tender child. You know.
I tend to hope that it's the third option, because I love
Thank
this.
you,
I love,
thank you.
thinking and believing that these moments, these glimmers are possible, and that they're bigger than just something like
Mm.
psychosis, that it is a glimpse into sort of the goodness out there, the light, the complete opposite of what you grew up in, and it's neat that we get to live this with you. And I wanted to ask, this was just such a pivotal moment in a sense of it was so powerful for you to experience this to the point where you did choose to draw about it, you wrote about it, and it's been something, like I said, that's come up in your interviews as well. Have you ever had anything reoccurring that has been this powerful in this way? These beings in particular, they just seem to offer such gentle care in the way that you explain how soothing it was, it made you feel. I was curious if you've had any other moments like that.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's a brilliant question because in between the first and the second MDMA treatment, I felt the angst and the agitation and the trauma within my body trying to come out, but I wasn't able to kind of be with it on my own. So I followed a guided meditation to call in healed and evolved ancestors. Um, and what that led to was me having an incredibly intense 40-minute somatic process that was really, I was choking and retching so violently at the end of it that I had to physically stop myself from re-experiencing it. But what that started is, and then after the second MDMA treatment, when I started reliving memories every day for an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours, is I started having a way where I would lay down on the bed in the spare room, and I would call out to my ancestors, to my healed and evolved ancestors, to my angels, and I would ask for their guidance and their protection. Now, I had healing processes where I could either imagine, either hallucinate, either psychotically believe or experience, or maybe it really did happen. But I could feel these golden beings around me that were seemingly working with light. I could sometimes almost feel them touching me. I could feel in some of the processes I had, I just felt such an immense sense of love that was coming from them to me. And that really was reoccurring for a year or two while I was reliving the memories. And they weren't, I couldn't always sense that they were there, but I always felt held by them. So I didn't always feel a direct presence, but I always had a sense they were there.
I love that. I love that it stuck with you even after the
Mm,
specific memory
yeah,
maybe started fading away or, became something that you moved on from in a sense.
yeah.
I love that that stuck with you. That's really impactful. Another thing
Mm,
I thought was interesting that you mentioned in this article, the dichotomy of both remembering and needing to forget the experience. I was kind of wanted to ask you how you navigate that because I think that's actually an important point of being able to handle holding on to the healing aspects while at the same time letting go of the pain and wanting to see
mm.
kind of what that part meant to you, and how you've processed that in your own journey.
Oh, that's a great question. So probably two or three parts to that. So on one level, as I was reliving things somatically through my body, there was, like when I relived the death of the girl, which I did quite a few times, I had grief, I had terror, I had rage, but in feeling these emotions that were caught up in the gestalt of that experience, a weight lifted off me, and I did, um, if you imagine stuck energy or stuck emotional energy within my body, by feeling it and processing it, it did lift a weight from me. So I think there is something to be said for, with any kind of trauma, finding a way to process the trauma energy will release, like the shaking will release the grief, the pain, the shutdown, and will allow you to get to a state of greater equilibrium. So I do think some processing is necessary, but I think finding a really good somatic therapist who will basically get you in a very regulated, um, centered, calm, grounded place. And then from that place, they'll dip into your trauma, experience some of the trauma, but then come back to the regulated place before it overwhelms you and keep going in and out, and just gradually and very safely process trauma that way. So that's one part of it. To be honest, on a day-to-day basis, I kind of forget anyway, like the disassociative tendency within me is so strong that it's not with, in many ways it's protected me so incredibly because it's just not with me on a day-to-day basis. I have flashbacks, I have painful feelings or thoughts, I have pains in my body, but not as bad as they used to be. Um, but when I think about it and I think about everything that I've relived, there's a great sense of peace and calmness actually that comes with it. It's almost like it justifies how I can feel sometimes. And um yeah, it just gives me peace. It just gives me peace, really. Um when I can identify that this is actually what I've been through and this is why it has been such a struggle in my life.
Thank you for answering that. And the more I read this, the more, I mean, it's like this with all your blog posts. I could do it with the wolf one too that we just read. Have you ever tried to recreate like the music or like the harmonics that you heard with
No,
this? No.
but no,
Would it
but
be
it
possible,
was.
do you think, or is it such like an impossible feeling and sort of sound that you're around that you don't know if you could create it? I'd be when as I'm reading this, I'm like, man, I want to hear what that sounded like.
Oh, oh, yeah, no, I don't know if I could recreate that. It was almost a feeling. It was a feeling of music, if that makes sense. Um,
Makes sense.
yeah. So yeah, I couldn't. Yeah, yeah. But no,
And
that's a beautiful idea.
yeah, I think that would be really cool if ever it was possible. These
Mm,
experiences can be just so somatic with how something like this can impact you so much because it's like engaging all of your sensory output, and heightening your abilities
mm,
where you feel like you're almost there in that moment because it's so powerful, and
yeah.
I thought it was also really beautiful that the golden sun and that feeling of home, the warmth and safety that gave you. And I'm
Mm,
sure it's such a unsafe feeling after you remember your past sometimes, going through the
mm.
remembering and, even what you risk speaking out. Does that home feeling still ground you that you felt here? Have you found another way in your life to recreate that feeling of safety and that warmth for yourself in those really chaotic
Mm.
times?
I'm probably quite disconnected from it on a day-to-day basis, but when I
Yeah,
think about it or when I reread it and I remember it, it feels immensely, you know, it's like, oh no, that was there. Like I felt that. It's actually very soothing. But on a day-to-day basis, unfortunately, I'm probably a little bit in rebuilding my life, managing mode. Um, I should meditate more. I should put the work in to reconnect to that sense of peace more readily, to be honest. And I've done a lot of that in the past. And I don't, I think when I pray and when I talk to God, I think that can bring me close to it. I think when I worship, that can bring me close to it. I've got a group of friends where we really sort of tap into the Holy Spirit and we really worship God from a moment by moment, singing, praising, that kind of thing. And that can bring me close to it. But I'm not as connected to it as I probably should be.
I think it's amazing though that you're able to find it in kind of a moment of need. These memories that you have explained on podcasts that you didn't go into a lot of detail here were
Mm,
so harrowing and so horrific to
mm,
just even momentarily be able to connect with that groundedness and that warmth and that soothing and that comfort. I mean, it
mm.
had to have just been such a relief at that time. You probably felt so weightless compared to how heavy it was feeling reliving all
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah, it was a really key layer of experience that I re-experienced. It did stay with it as I was reliving other memories. It did stay with me, so it did act as a grounding rod for a while. I think just because I've had the eventual breakdown into psychosis and then going into hospital, really that just kind of shut everything away, and then I've had to rebuild and reclaim, and maybe this acts as a really good reminder for me actually of the wonder and the mysticism of it all. um yeah, the golden ones, or my healed and evolved ancestors, or the angels that I would call in for aid. The guy online that does it is a chap called Daniel Four, and he does this ancestral work. But whatever your belief system, I believe asking for spiritual help in the pursuit of trauma healing and resolution, I think, is very important. I do believe there's a spiritual component to the abuse, and I do believe um, calling in good vibes, or calling in God or Christ or whatever your belief system is, calling in support on that level, I do think really helps. I think it's something that we miss in this psychological brain heavy world that we live. So I would really recommend to a survivor to try and find a way to bring healthy spirituality into your process of healing trauma.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. And I think that's something you've done really well is finding a balance of that. Have these sort of mystical spiritual experiences impacted your relationship with faith and with what you believe?
Well, this really opened me up to God, and I knew I was just like, "There's God. I just know God exists," and it led on to me eventually coming to Christ and becoming a Christian. Um, but it is something I can reflect on and really believe that I've had an encounter with spirit, basically. So it is very reassuring. And I've spoken to people, and there's people that are quite jealous in a nice way that I've had that experience, because in a way there is a certainty that I have now that I didn't have before. And it is very reassuring. Like I just know this isn't it. We're not just flesh and bone. And I know that something comes after this. I feel that in my bones, in my heart.
And I feel like the power of that soothingness and that comfort, how you can just feel like your stress just kind of like melting away in this
Mm,
goal, and it takes the readers on that journey with you. We feel elevated in that moment with you, especially now looking at it with this photo
yeah.
that you drew. But I think it's interesting how you were able to experience this. And I also think it would be such a positive thing to look back on when you do need grounded to try to tap back into that soothing feeling again. Um,
Yeah.
I'm sure
I'm
that can be very stabilizing when everything feels destabilizing.
I'm taking that as an instruction. So yes.
Yes, just home.
um
You need grounded.
yeah, yeah, no, it's really good to reflect on it and spend time with it. And I think as well this also comes into the conversation that we're going to have about psychosis, because I ended up having a very strong sense of God and what God is and the system of God, and not only God but goddess. But I also had very strong experiences of negative entities, of dark entities, of a fallen sun. Um, so maybe I can touch on those briefly, if that's okay. Of
Absolutely, yes. And
Yeah.
speaking of sun, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if this is meant to be a sun per se. It's a golden ball. It's
Mm,
light, but in your
mm,
first entry that we went into with the wolf, you had that big blazing sun as kind of like
mm,
such a big pivotal part of the second photo that was shown. And
mm,
here it is front and center too of this one. I like the iconography of how light, follows in the darkness of some of these corners and crevices that you take us down in these blog posts. The sun, these golden lights are just there shining for us at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually it's often there in my artwork, some kind of representation of the sun. Um,
It's beautiful.
but yeah, in the Gestalt where I re-experienced the death of the murder of the girl, and when we lived in Nigeria, and I relived my body, my soul ejecting my body. I relived my mind seemingly shattering like a plane of glass being dropped on the floor. Um, I re-experienced almost like a feeling of madness and of panic and of sheer terror. But in that experience, when my soul ejected from my body, I've also re-experienced times where my soul left my body and I would just look down upon myself and my abusers, and it was almost like an outer body experience. And I think if that is to be believed, if that is to be true, I came to believe that was something I was quite good at. I was quite good at ejecting out of my body so that I didn't have to suffer so greatly. And in this particular experience, when the girl was murdered, I did see a dark entity, a black writhing sun with tentacles on the surface, with the wailing of the damned emanating from it. It was parasitic, it was cancerous, it was devouring, it was unrelenting in its nature. It was the great devourer. It was terrifying. It was and Wolf was scared of it as well. Wolf was really scared of it, and he's not scared of anything, but he was scared of that. Um, so I've also re-experienced memories or gestalts where there's abusers that are up here abusing me, and seemingly above and behind their heads, I've seen dark wraith-like apparitions which appear to be feeding on the suffering, on the emotional, energetic discharge of the children that are being abused, and that they're harvesting the energy in some way. So again, that could be delusion. I'm not saying that literally happened, but I re-experienced that and it seemed very real at the time. And there seemed to be a relationship between these dark wraith-like creatures and the black sun that I had seen. Um, and this is probably segueing a bit into the first topics we would talk about to do when we go into the psychosis, but maybe we just want to do a little bit of a packaging before we get into that of just
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think before we go into talking about the psychosis, look, one of the things I want to try and convey is somehow in my mind, with where I did end up going, there is a mechanism in my mind, and I'm pretty sure in other people's minds as well, that is a self-narrating, um, almost like an AI script generating a story that's actually surprisingly logical and real, but that happens without any conscious knowledge of my own. So that that happened to me in my reliving of these memories. Now, my detractors would say, well, that's because all of it's psychosis, Daniel, and all of it's delusion.
Yeah.
And I would say, well, look, I've relived hundreds of hours of being raped, and I believe particularly what came out in the beginning. Um, but I believe as things went on, I gradually slipped deeper and deeper into psychosis. Basically, is that's the sense of it that I've made. But I mean, there's a chance it's all delusion. I'm open to that, and I've really sat with that. But it's not what I believe. It's not what I believe. So yeah, so that's one facet of it, is that I would want you as a survivor to be aware of, is that it is possible in times of great distress, in times of great pain, in times of overwhelming horror, or in the reliving of that, for the mind to start making up some kind of story that is self-narrating, that is self-editing, that is self-generating, and that is very logical, makes a lot of sense to you at least, or to me. Um, and you know, when I realized when I was I was still re-experiencing being raped while I was in hospital. I was having somatic processes still, and one day it just kind of clicked. It was like, this couldn't have happened. I just don't think this happened, and it started this whole cascade of me questioning everything. And one of the things that was so beautiful about the somatic processing that I was doing is I felt like I'd connected to something that I could trust absolutely, which was the wisdom of and the showing, my body's showing. Now, if I look at that and break that down a bit more, I think actually the showing of my body is absolute and is absolutely trustworthy. What became difficult is where my mind started adding a narrative to it. So my body showed various positions, it showed various things that were done to me, it showed like that's true. Like the story, the physical story of me being raped is true. But there was a narrative made up of the mind that increasingly became delusional. And unfortunately, that can be not always trusted.
Yes, and I think this is a really good and just important topic because I've heard that a lot on this podcast. And I think one of the things that we do when we're very panicked and kind of in those moments too, where everything's destabilized, you have an adrenaline rush, you're frantic, and not to mention you're dealing with just these heinous trauma memories. This
Mm,
isn't just happy, it doesn't just come whenever, it's not all happy stuff that you're feeling in those moments, and that you're thinking about. You're dealing with things that are just so incomprehensible that even just one of those memories would break somebody and shatter them into a million pieces if they were to,
mm,
remember that about themselves. So I think one of the things that is really good to do in these moments, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about in this conversation, is kind of that groundedness, because unfortunately there's also the franticness and that anxiety and that adrenaline can make us want,
mm,
it's like that fight or flight, and a lot of times it's easier to get up and fight, whenever you're feeling those things. And that can sometimes also lead down some paths that can put us in more danger in some way or implicate us more or, give people around us or people that are witnessing it, a misunderstanding and miscontext of what we're actually going through in those moments.
mm. Yeah. And I think just a few things to bear in mind. One of them is, look, the mind has got the capacity under undue stress, under horror, under violation, under pain, to have this self-narrating, self-generating story mode that can take over that you're not even conscious of that is happening. So that's one option. Another option is like, look, in my story and in other survivor stories that I've spoken to, often you're drugged. There's often mind-altering substances that are used, or roofies, or any other pills that are used to put you into either a subdued or an altered state of consciousness. So what you're reliving could literally be true from what you've seen while you were drugged, while they were raping you. So that is another option. Another option is, look, sophisticated pedophiles, they will often dress up in an outfit, say as a policeman or as a crocodile or as a big teddy bear, so that when the child, if the child tries to disclose, they're disclosing, or it builds an implicit lack of trust in authority figures like the police. It builds extra fear because they think, my God, this is really a bear that's violating me. But then it also builds incredulity. What's the word? Incredulousness when they would try and disclose, because they would say, yeah, there was a bear and it was raping me. And of course, any adult would be like, don't be silly, a bear would never do that. But sophisticated pedophiles know how to play these kind of games in order to protect themselves and unfortunately further damage the victim. So we've got the self-narrating tendency of the mind. We've got the possibility of drugs being used during the time of violation. We've got the proclivity of sophisticated pedophiles to dress up. And then if you're getting more into a satanic world, there's often masks, things like that are used, which can be very distressing. Um, and something that I've considered actually is I believe that when we're young, we're very sensitive. And, you hear lots of stories about children talking to invisible friends or talking to ghosts or that kind of thing. And I often wonder, and with some of the things we're going to talk about, I do wonder if there's a spiritual component where you're seeing something that is maybe energetically true, or is a way the mind's made a literal representation of something that is much more on a felt level. But but there's some kind of wisdom in there to be gleaned, even if it seems very out there. There's some hint towards the truth. Um, yeah,
I love that you brought all of that up. One thing that I try to stress to people is that there's no such thing as a fake memory. If it's a memory and it's something that is real to us, it's a real memory. The
yeah,
thing that we have to look at, especially in these cases of these extreme abuses, these really crazy, insane, psychotic scenarios that they put these children in, the
yeah,
different garb that they wear and dresses and outfits and costume that is involved with a lot of this, the different scenarios that you'll be in, whether I've heard of people in a lab setting, people underground, people
mm,
at a fire with people in masks. You're seeing, lots of different scenarios that these children are put in where without
mm,
context and being so young, like you said, and maybe under the influence of drugs, everything else, there's a lot of context to take in for such a small child to try to put words to what
yeah,
they're seeing, especially as they're undergoing and under such stress.
yeah,
So I would say there's no such thing as a fake memory. It's figuring out the context of it. Like you said, is it something spiritual that you're seeing that might not be rooted here in the physical reality, but you're in touch for whatever reason with something that you're seeing on an energetic level that maybe nobody else around you can see? Is it grandpa that dressed up as a bear or an alien and perpetrated the child? I hear that time and time again that was so confusing for survivors. I had one survivor that had a memory of being perpetrated by Minnie Mouse and couldn't it like drove her crazy. She couldn't figure out why she had this memory of being perpetrated by Minnie Mouse. And eventually the full memory came that it was a relative that dressed up as Minnie Mouse and violated her. But in your child's
yeah,
eye, when you're under you're on
mm,
LSD, you're on these different drugs, you're so young, trying to make sense of
mm,
things that no child should ever have to make sense of, no adult either for that matter, and then you see somebody in a costume that you actually know, but you don't know in that moment because they're all dressed up. You can't see who they are. I mean, how confusing to try to
yeah,
decode all of that and reverse engineer it in your mind as you're
yeah,
experiencing it and saying, how can this possibly be real? And then the other
yeah,
thing I want to bring up too is programming in itself. You look at some of the programming that they do incorporate aliens, they incorporate reptilian beings, they incorporate outer space, they incorporate Disney scenarios and all kinds of different scripts and programs that they will put children into and different characters that are introduced, and so I think also, programming can come into this too, where it can be something that the child literally experienced. It's a program that they went through, but it's
mm,
not something that was actually physically happening outside of their body. It was an internal program and script that was given to
yeah,
them that when they're remembering it, it seems so somatic and real. But it was something that was done to them by their perpetrators.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, two things I wanted to touch on from that. One of them is like, look, the trauma of being raped is is severe enough for an adult. But if you're a child, that if it happens between the age of 8 or 9, there's a very strong chance you're going to disassociate as a result and have no memory of it. It is so traumatic. Um, so just that simple, terrible act on its own is enough to make things very confused. But that, as you said, like the memory's true, just some of the details might be a bit blurry, some of the details might be a bit confused, which the perpetrators or the enablers or the ones that aren't going to stand by you find it very convenient to use that stuff as a way of discrediting you and of turning people against you and of convincing everybody why you're just loopy and round the bend and you're whatever, but the fundamental act of being traumatized in such a way is enough to put you in such a confused state. Then when you bring in things such as we've talked about, um, such as, for example, the use of illicit drugs, the use of dressing up, the use of programming, this, it just makes it something else entirely. So then, you said like a therapist might watch this, and I think it's something that really needs to be taken on board more. It really needs to be considered more within the psychological and psychiatric levels. But something else I wanted to touch on quickly, you mentioned programming, and look, in the programming that I've relived, that I'm confident literally happened to me. They murdered the girl, and they would in the at the end of it, they had me believing that it was me that had killed her. They made me believe that there was something bad and something evil and wicked inside me that they were trying to get out of me, and that they were trying to help me. So abusers are very good at twisting narratives. They're even very good at making you believe somebody is there that isn't there, or that they're somebody else, or that they're your daddy, or they're whatever. But their programming is very hypnotic. It's very NLP-like. It's very practiced. It's very sophisticated. And then again, if you consider that this programming is being induced, is being propagated while the victim is under such a horrific stress, strain at such a vulnerable and tender age, it makes the programming particularly potent and particularly terrible. So, yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And like you said, they go through every length possible to make sure under any circumstance that you
Mm,
aren't believed, that you don't sound sane, that you
yeah.
probably aren't sane in that moment because the things that come up that you're remembering are just so heinous. How could anybody be sane going through that in those moments, But at the same time, like you said, they get joy and excited when the first thing a survivor comes out and says is, oh my gosh, I'm an alien, or I was part of, an alien fleet, or I saw these aliens, they're coming out. And again, it doesn't mean that that wasn't an experience that somebody had, but they specifically program things that activate first when somebody's waking up. So those are the first things that you go out and tell people, and they love that because you're not sharing sort of the root of what all that was, which is
Mm,
programming, which is illegal crime and perpetration on a child and exploitation. You're talking about things that seem to the normal person that will probably be on the other side listening to that didn't go through what you did, that could seem very crazy, and I've heard another common one, I think you'll talk about this a little bit, is kind of the God programming, where not necessarily the ritualistic side and the abuse itself, but remembering memories and coming out of programming and thinking, oh my God, I'm God, I'm Jesus, I am the chosen one, I'm the Messiah, and we've seen examples of this even in Hollywood with Kanye West, for example,
yeah.
coming out and proclaiming that he's basically, God's incarnate. He even changed his celebrity name to reflect this. So we do see how programming can come out, and because the way that it presents without context to the person listening of the background of it and without knowing the person's past, if that's the only glimmer that we get into somebody's life is what's being presented in that moment, I'm God, I'm an alien. That's a very quick way to not necessarily discredit yourself. It doesn't mean you're not telling the truth. It means the person on the other side of hearing that is going to be like, what am I listening to? This person sounds crazy without the context. So, but like how you said, that's what the abusers want. They don't want anything that comes out of your mouth to be received on the other end where somebody panicking with you and saying, "Oh my God, we need to help you. We need to take care of you. How could this be happening?" They want the other person on the other side to be like, "Whoa, what's going on with you? Are you all right? Do you need a
Mm.
therapist? Do you need to be admitted? Do we need to call 911?" They want that to be the response, and without the proper context of what a victim or survivor went through, it can be very confusing, not just for the survivor to process it, but for whoever's on that receiving end of hearing that information firing off. That is sort of the first layers of breaking off programming, what they have activate first and what the survivor goes and tells people first.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it should be considered as a warning sign that serious abuse has occurred.
Yes, thank
You know,
you.
it should be a red flag that, okay, something's really happened here. It may not be that they were abducted by aliens, but there's a very strong chance something very serious has happened to this person. And as you say, this is part of the programming, part of the conditioning they've been subjected to. Unfortunately, because people are quite ignorant of this phenomena, and I was until I went through it. Um, as you say, they tend to look at it with disbelief. It tends to confirm that the person is not credible. The person gets locked up in a mental institute and they get medicated, and it's
Sad.
yeah, it's a shame. It's a
It's
shame.
so sad. And so before we sort of talk more about this, I wanted to go back in time and share your experience, because you're not just talking from research and from reading books. You actually experienced this on different levels where you
Mm,
had to step back and ground yourself and say
yeah.
what's actually happening. We talked about it. I'll link Daniel's playlist below. We did go in depth on the on just the his life experiences involving this on past episodes. We didn't dig into the psychology of it as much as we are right now. But if you want to just give kind of an overview of what you went through, and maybe we can kind of dig into that experience a little bit and then share how you came out of it, what you've learned about it, and some of the pitfalls that, we need to educate survivors on navigating as they're going through this.
Yes. So, me being arrested, should we cover
Yeah.
that? Or yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, yeah. So, as a result, excuse me, of what we're going to be talking about, I ended up getting arrested, and the circumstances around that was I'd got into a place where I believed I was the chosen one, where it was up to me to effectively do my part or do a very large part in saving the world. I believed I was very close to God. I believed there was a very potent and terrible enemy here that needed to be undone. And I had also, Wolf had become more and more real, and I believed that I could literally transform into Wolf. So I set up a situation that would mean that I would have to change into Wolf. And then if I changed into Wolf, that means that I would be strong enough to initiate a holy war that all of the violators of the innocent would have been able to be persecuted and put on the cross effectively. That I would transform literally into like a man wolf hybrid that would be able to hunt down and track through the soul scent of those that had violated the innocent. But I needed like an extraordinary situation in order for me to transform into wolf. So I went out one day armed with a spear, with a gladius, with a knife, and with an axe, and I went along the coastline. I did my war dance, which is something I did, which was like a martial arts kata to music, free flowing, basically. Um, and I spoke the end times prophecy, which I've got here. And then I ended up going to an area local to me. It wasn't like super busy, but there were people around, and the police were obviously called on me. I ended up getting tasered 3 times, and getting arrested. They did a good job. They did a good job. I did make it a bit difficult for them. Being tasered 3 times wasn't fun,
Mm.
but I was in some ways I was really a risk to other people, but in other ways I wasn't a risk because it was all dependent on me becoming wolf. So I knew that the problems with the world that I saw could never be combated through me picking up a sword and going and chopping somebody up, a paedophile up or whatever, because I'd just get arrested and then it would all be over. I'd be locked up for the rest of my life. So I knew something supernatural needed to happen. But then you can also start to see as we talk about it how that had actually fed into the delusion in the first place, because the problem was so overwhelming and so all encompassing. There's a way that my mind made a story or made something about me that made me feel powerful when actually I was powerless.
And is that what you felt Wolf would become? Would be sort of this unstoppable force of nature, this like God type
Exactly.
caricature if you changed into him in that moment?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would be like the incredible. He would be like a wolf version of the Incredible Hulk. So that's what it's crazy saying it now, but that's what my mind had kind of worked to, and it was effectively an unkillable wolf of God that was here to enact God's vengeance upon the earth, and he would not be stopped. He would not be stopped by anything. There was nothing that could stop him.
And
Um,
do you remember anything that triggered that specifically to where you started planning this and felt so strongly about it?
Really, it was just a gradual process of
Right.
me slipping deeper and deeper into delusion until I just reached a point of making a bad decision, which I've paid a price for. Um, there were certain stresses, certain strains that kind of contributed to it. Um, including reliving being raped. Um, but yeah, it was just a gradual slipping away. And this is really one of the things I want to try and convey to you guys, especially if you're a survivor yourself, is it doesn't necessarily just happen like that. It'll slowly work its way in, and you will gradually find yourself getting more and more delusional until you end up getting yourself into trouble. And I guess my hope is that by sharing this, that if this is maybe you've survived some kind of SRA, CSA, maybe what we're going to talk about, you're experiencing something similar in your sense making of the world. And I just hope that this would act as a way to maybe help you catch yourself, to be aware of the mechanism in your mind that might be making up a protective narrative, and to come back from the edge and not put yourself in a position where you're at risk of hurting somebody else or at risk of hurting yourself, which is just, it was as much, in some ways with the police, I was so pained, I was just wanting to die. In some ways it was a death wish, in other ways it was a let's start a holy war and I'm going to turn into a super werewolf and hunt down every person that's ever hurt a child and torture them to death. Um,
Which honestly isn't a bad thing to want. It's rooted in
mm,
something good that you were fighting things that you felt needed
yeah,
eradicated, the child abuse and people who perpetrate
yeah,
children. That's I think
yeah,
is always something that comes up with stories similar to yours or on some different level,
really.
where somebody reacts to these really strong feelings. It's because they have their free will back and now they can do what they want with it. And it's such a
Mm,
powerful feeling to have. It's overwhelming at times. And, to pair that with the anger and the rage that is inside, and just wanting all of a sudden, you have access to your moral compass and you can act on it. I
mm,
don't think that that's anything less than heroic for somebody to want those things and to, want to pursue meaningful action. But like you said, you know, coming from a world of programming and extreme violence and illicit and illegal activity that gets covered up, that doesn't necessarily translate to the real world where we can do that without consequence anymore and
mm,
without
mm,
being able to skirt the law and having things be covered up and protected. All of a sudden now you become somebody that they're looking at as, oh my gosh, is this guy violent, or is this guy going to commit a crime? That layer
yeah,
of protection and kind of secrecy is gone, and now it's so exposed. And being in the context of regular society, it can be sort of this thing that is very confusing for authorities and people who are witnessing that.
absolutely. Yeah, like I'd reported my core abuser, my so-called father. I'd reported him to the police. So there was already things in place that I was associated with the authorities. And I don't know if that went in my favor at all in any way, but yeah, I just really wish, just for you, whoever you may be watching this, that you don't end up in the position that I'm in. I do believe it's possible to catch yourself and to kind of bring yourself back from the edge, but you've got to recognize the narratives and the nature of this mechanism in the mind that can be self-generating a narrative that is protective. And if you can recognize that and bring yourself back, well, then I don't want you to hurt anyone and I don't want you to hurt yourself. So that's really why I would want to share it with them.
In your case, do you think some of that was programming, that they wanted you to feel that and to act on it to possibly implicate yourself?
I don't know. I don't know. There was a lot of programming. I don't know if this was programming. I think this was more to do with Wolf. This was more to do with the wild, protective aspect of myself. Um, but it's also to do with these other facets of things that I'd seen that I then started making sense of, and it just all started making sense. And I mean, the programming will be in there somewhere, but I don't think it's direct. It was directly programmed in the way that you said. No.
I think too, it's fascinating how some of these parts can also come out. And I'm not saying this was in your case necessarily, but I've heard it spoken many times from survivors. These different parts that are created, they're all given different roles. Some have these
Yes.
sort of front
Yeah.
roles, and then some are actually doing things that the survivor wants to act on. They had a job to do those types of things on the back
Mm,
end for the cult. We hear a
yeah.
lot about assassinations and spying and different violence trainings, and even,
Mm,
dog trainings, kennel trainings, wolves. Some of these things have come up multiple times on the podcast where
yeah.
these parts, that was their job. That's all that they knew. That's what they were created specifically to do. And so
Yeah.
also too, I think these parts, whenever they're first acquainting with the world, and you don't have a programmer now, you have destabilized your system, and now these parts, they don't know what to
Mm,
do. And so when they emerge, this was their life, this was their job. And so I also have such compassion whenever I hear these stories, because I think, gosh, if that's all I knew in my own life, I mean, what a change to then have to just shut that off, to have to confine to these crazy, rules of society that were the complete opposite of what you had to abide by your whole life,
yeah.
and to not have that outlet, to not have those trainings, those things that you were used for, that you were conditioned in for so many years with so many hours.
Mm,
So I think also too, there's such a compassion aspect to, even if it is rooted in some, delusion or fantasy, what the goal is for doing these things. There's also really good reasons why those parts feel they need to do that also. It's fulfilling for them, because that's the whole reason why they existed. That's what their value was, based off of in these cults, and that's what they felt their purpose was in the world, to to bring justice and to fight evil, and
yeah.
even though it was for people who were evil, you're taught as a child that, children are conditioned to think that what you're doing is for good, that you're fighting bad people. They really root that into you, that like you're helping to save the world. You're doing them favors. What you're doing is good, and even though for what you're doing for them, it benefits them, but not, not the people that it actually is perpetrated on. So I think that's also interesting that, you had these parts that had these roles also, and, fusing it with everything, you just see how,
Mm,
powerful the unconscious mind is, to how it can all come into fruition right in front of you.
mm. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah, just on that note, I think my programming was more actually around being a slave subject, basically. Um, that was more the type of programming that I had. Um,
Yeah, and I'm
yeah, no,
definitely not saying that example was just for you. I've just heard so many
totally,
examples
totally.
of, this sort of, you're fighting evil in one world, and then you move to
Yeah,
this other world and you try to do the same thing, and all of a sudden you're getting in trouble for it. And it's like, well, wait a
yeah,
minute, that's what I've done my whole life.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And and I guess just again, it's just the scale of the evil of this is just beyond the pale. I mean, it is the worst of the worst of the worst crime imaginable. I would say it's worse than murder, and it's just it's abhorrent. And if you are having your parts react in the way that Emma was just saying, I just want to again say it's just so understandable that that could be your reaction. And society doesn't tend to look at it in that way, but there's some people that do. And I hope. I hope you find solace in that, you know.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that you did. And so
Mm,
let's talk about kind of how you troubleshot that as it was happening. You realized, oh my gosh, I did this. I'm confronted with authority, and
mm.
this thing I thought would happen didn't. What did it feel like in that moment when it didn't transpire the way that you thought it would?
Well, I thought that it was still going to happen. After I was arrested, I thought that I was having going to have to go deep into the belly of the beast that is the judicial system, and that Wolf would awaken from within a maximum security mental hospital, basically. So, and then I had the realization one day when I was reliving being abused while I was in hospital, and then it just kind of clicked, like this just didn't happen. So I think the sterile environment helped. I was medicated at that point, but I think it was less about the medication, to be honest. It was more just me. Yeah, I just came to realize that this couldn't have happened. That it was one of the things, and this is something I'll touch on, is like nuance and my connection to my critical mind, because I was following from here, from my solar plexus, a feeling of truth and a feeling of resonance. So that's what was really guiding me down this garden path of getting a bit lost and getting very lost in the end. But I'd really stopped using my critical mind so much. So one of the things that happened is that as I reconnected to my critical mind, I started to question a bit more, did this actually happen? And then it just clicked one day, like, God, no, this didn't happen. And then it all cascaded. And I was like, God, did any of it happen? Did some of it happen? And that was a really difficult period. That was a really difficult period. But yeah, do you mind if we touch on just some of the content of the delusion?
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
that
Let's do it.
okay? Is that
Yeah.
okay? Um, so I'll touch on the chosen one that you mentioned. So I came to believe, and this is all caught up in the Black Sun and God. I came to believe that I was the Christ. I didn't believe I was Jesus, although I guess I believed I was the same soul. I believed that we lived many lives and many deaths. I believed that I had been here since the very beginning and had had many, many, many lives here. And I believed that I was here to lead a holy war that would result in the end of days and the eventual rebirth and renewal of this world. Um, so it was all very consistent and coherent with my beliefs and with the narrative and with the abuse, I suppose. It was semi-Christian, semi-pagan, semi-Viking in sort of its tonality, um, which are probably some of my main influences. But I came to believe that this black sun that I talked about was a fallen god, that every star in the sky was a god, and that they were all the children of creation, and that each sun had a realm, so a solar system that they played the game of creation in, and that our God was our sun, physically manifested as, which made complete and utter sense to me at the time. Um, I also believe that there was a goddess, so that there was a god and a goddess intimately connected, and through their eternal love making, that souls were born and brought into this realm. And I believe that that black sun that I saw was a fallen god. It was one that had broken sacred law, and it had one that, because it had broken sacred law, its polarity had inverted, and it had devoured its beloved, and then it had devoured its world, and its chosen children, the serpents or the reptilians, had come with it to devour other planets together. So it really was an incredibly in-depth and I guess to me at least, to me it seemed very coherent and it all just made complete sense. I relived memories that I now believe are a replay of the earlier memories when the girl was murdered, but I relived memories when I was taken under the ground, when there was where the reptilians lived deep beneath the earth, basically. Um, Relived being put on a cross, relived being tortured, relived having children murdered around me, which could have happened when I was younger. Um, but yeah, it just got really, really out there, and these reptilians were shapeshifters. They'd come from other planets that they devoured on their way here, and they'd been here for a very long time. But yeah, I came to believe I was some kind of golden child that had come back to save the world and to save it from this fallen god that was going to devour this world and to save it from these reptilian beings that were here, that had corrupted all of humanity, that all of our governments were satanically led, and that they were beholden and answerable to these reptilian creatures. Um, I believed in soulmates, that we had a soulmate that was in the time we were born, a male and a female soul were born together and bonded together and were meant to find each other in each and every life that they lived. So it was a beautiful idea, you know. Um, and then I eventually came to believe the worst of my story was that there were satanic witches that were behind the satanic paedophile networks and that were even worse and even more secretive than the Satanists. And that these witches were like blood witches, that they practiced their rites, at celestial windows in the calendar, that they were incredibly wicked. Um, but yeah, it like for you watching this, the narrative wouldn't have to be exactly the same, but I've questioned with like seeing the reptilians, like maybe that was me seeing something spiritual, something serpent-like in their energy, or in their character. Um, I don't quite know how I came to make that up. But I did. you know, I did. And I don't believe that. I just don't believe that happened to me. And I believe everything that I relived is in the position that my body took. So at some point, my body took the position of being tied on a cross. Like I believed that happened to me, but I don't believe that that happened deep under the earth, surrounded by dark reptilian creatures. I believe it happened in probably somebody's cellar or, you know, a dark room somewhere surrounded by monsters, but not, and they are monsters, but not by reptilian monsters. Um, So that's a little bit about the delusion. Does that give a bit of a
It does, yes. And I wanted to ask, how have you coped with being in those moments? What's your process? I just want to sort of give survivors maybe a starting point on if
yeah,
they're in those moments, how to maybe step back and ground themselves. I wanted to hear your process for, those extreme memories and
got
moments,
you.
how you ground yourself. What's your process going through that?
Got you. Well, there's two principles I would really recommend. So to try and have a position of nuance and to try and reconnect to your critical mind. So by having nuance, can you hold a position of this could be true, this could be untrue, or this could be something else, or maybe it's neither, or maybe it's just something I can't even imagine right now. So because I had so many people that were against that anything happened to me, I that exacerbated my tendency to believe in myself, and that exacerbated my own certainty to my own detriment. So I lost really my capacity for nuance. I became very fixated. So my first tip is to try with your experiences, try and hold a position of that, look, this could be true, this could be not true, this could be something else. Um, to a degree, at least to a degree. And I'm not talking here about if you've re-experienced being raped. I'm talking about if you're having experiences of reptilians, for example. Just try holding that nuanced position and just see what comes through that. And then the other one is the critical mind. So just make sure you're not doing what I was doing, which was just living from my solar plexus, following truth, feeling truth, just being truth. But totally divorced and disconnected from my critical mind. Try and have your, I think there's a place for intuition and there's a place for critical mind. And in my earlier life, I've been incredibly critically minded. And then in my later life, I've been incredibly intuition led. And probably the best thing I could say is a bit of both is great. Like a bit of intuition and following it, but remain connected to your critical mind as well. So those would be my two main ways if you're having these kind of experiences. I'm not saying that they're true or that they're not true, but I think it's reasonable to say hold some nuance with it and retain some critical thinking with it, and then see what you come up with, really. Is that
Yes. Early on in my journey learning about all of this, it began pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess learning about and hearing about things that are very widely accepted, that
yeah,
children can be abused, children can be trafficked. But the deeper I went into these stories, the more I started hearing about these nuances also of all these experiences of people uh, being in contact with, seeing, having programming done by or with reptilians or different beings. Of the spiritual aspect really opened up. And I honestly don't know, I can't say one way or another what is true and what's not for everybody, but I know I was telling you before we logged on here, there's really just like nothing that's off the table for me anymore hearing this because I know that the world that I grew up in and what I thought I knew just isn't true. But at the same time, I do also know, and I've also had to ground myself and reckoning with the other side of it, which is the critical side, knowing that these are very sophisticated people who have
yeah,
access to lots of technology. They have lots of money to buy very realistic looking costumes, to put children in very realistic looking scenarios. And that it's not off the table that there is the aspect of them setting up a sort of a play or a scene that they're putting the child into that looks very realistic in every type of way. And,
yeah,
couldn't be more the opposite. It's just a very sophisticated,
yeah,
theater basically. So I do
yeah,
think it's good to talk about both sides of this because like you said, there is the intuition and there's also the reality of trying to cope with what you saw as a child and remembering that as an adult. It's two totally
mm,
different points in time and two different brain capacities. Our brains are very different and they're developmental
mm,
than they are as a full-grown adult. So there is a lot to these, and I think that it's so important that we step back for all of these memories that anybody has, and really step back and take into context how that memory unfolded for you and the different ways that it could have been
mm,
real, however that is, whether that is dress up, whether that's in the spiritual realm, what are all the different options and ways that this memory could have been experienced, and then you can kind of lead with your intuition a little bit and think a little bit about what sounded right for that time period. What did people around you have access to? Does the child remember tons of other spiritual
mm,
instances in their life, or do they remember being in a basement, that changed a lot and that the scenery changed a lot? And could that have been, a possibility that adults did that? So I
mm,
think it is really important that we look at all of these from both of those perspectives, and balance it instead of just being super critical, like a lot of society is, where they don't want to believe any of this can happen.
yeah,
But also to not be so intuitive to where the first thing that you remember in the context that you first remember it in becomes your 100% truth without exploring
exactly,
all the other options that this could have happened.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, because I didn't do that. I was doing what you just said. I was going with the first thing that came back and I was holding that as true. Whereas, as you say, if I'd have held onto my critical mind, I would be thinking, like, God, was I under? Because, people that are given mind-altering substances, they often have very similar experiences. They often see similar entities or similar things. Like, there's a very strong chart, or I know at least some of the times I was under the influence of mind-altering or subduing substances. So, but I wasn't. It's just the whole thing kind of just gradually picked up speed, and because it was so fantastical anyway, like a girl being murdered in front of me, or and I did really relive my mind being shattered. So it's just an incredible stress, an incredible pressure for anyone, even if it's just, you know, being raped. Like that is enough to break anybody. So I would hate for someone to think watching this that I am in any way trying to invalidate anyone's experience or anyone's memories. Like that's not what this is about. This is just it's just pointing where I went wrong and where I went off the garden path, and I would not want you to go through that because, to be perfectly honest, going to prison, going to a mental hospital, trying to rebuild my life afterwards, it's been like pretty tough going, and I wouldn't really wish that for you, not at all. You know, like if that can be avoided, which I can with the things that we've talked about in this episode, um, I just don't want you to get in the sort of trouble that I got into, really, and to catch yourself, to reground yourself, and come back to center with. And I think actually what we've discussed could really help with that.
How do you look at government authorities, these satanic elements that you were so convinced were,
Yeah,
sort of this conspiracy against you? Do you believe that on any level, or is that, or what do you believe now?
that is a great question. That's not a very comfortable question. um, oh no. What do I believe? I definitely believe that there are satanic pedophile networks that around the globe. I believe there's corruption within government, for example, vested interests, lobbying. There's big money, there's big military industrial complex, there's big food, there's big pharma, and all the mega corporations and the influences they have over our governments that mean that our politicians don't really represent us. Um, so I believe in a level of corruption, but I'm probably hesitant personally at this point to put the two together to make it all about a satanic agenda at this point, to be honest. When I believed that, it made things in some ways easier because I could see there was a bad guy and I knew the bad guy had to be taken down. And that actually helped propel me along my pathway of ending up getting in trouble. I just wonder now if the answer is a bit more complex. Um, I I believe there's definitely satanic networks out there, and but whether they control every government in the world, like I used to believe, I don't know if I believe that anymore.
As someone who's dealt with all these different ins and outs of the healing side, but also you were in the military, which is also, brought up a lot as being involved in things like this.
Yeah.
In your own opinion, have you seen goodness? And I'm sure you have, but I'd love to kind of hear, the goodness that you've seen out of these institutions that helps lead you to the conclusion that, maybe things are better than I thought they were. I
Mm,
should have faith in
mm,
authorities, or just have faith that there's people out there fighting for me and not every single person's out to get me
yeah.
and to, destroy humanity.
Yeah, well, that's a great question or great point. Like a good example for me is the mental hospital that I was in. Like there was there weren't any narcissists that I could notice. There wasn't a they were all well intentioned. They weren't necessarily all helpful, but the intention was obviously there. They wanted to help. And a lot of work and a lot of effort. You can see how they are trying to get you better. Like their understanding of things is not helpful all of the time, but where they get it wrong is more based on a outdated um, ideology or theory as opposed to malice, I think. Whereas before I would have seen it as malice. What it is actually is just regressive systems that need updating, basically. And there was a huge amount of care and yeah, warmth that I felt from the hospital staff actually, and a lot of like really positive relationships that were built. And I'd met some of the higher up people in the hospital as well, like the hospital manager and they were all like all really good people. I mean, I will say there is a particular belief system to psychiatry that I do find alarming and concerning to the extent that they think medication can just fix things. Um, I think psychology has got a much larger role to play than it currently does. And I think other aspects of psychology, including inner child work, including somatic therapy, I think really has a place here in England, it's the NHS, the National Health Service, but around the world. But yeah, in the military, it was they were good people, they were all kind of fucked up and they were all kind of but I know you have guests that have very different experiences, so I'm not trying to poo-poo on that, but
Yes.
just from what I've seen, because I've known commanding officers and I've known people at various ranks and so on. For me, the conspiracy is on the level of policy making and the level of decision making in higher government, or even in what you would call the deep state or the establishment, the bureaucrats that stay in power in between individual government administrations, where there could be just how things are done. Like I think there's conspiracy in so much as I don't believe the conflicts we go to are for the reasons that we're given. It's about regional power, it's about resources, it's about that kind of thing. Um, I don't know. I just don't know anymore. I guess for me, and this is just a choice I've had to make for my own situation. And I'm not saying, guys, that this is the right way. It's just what's been needed for myself. I'm just focusing on my life right now with trying to rebuild my life, trying to live a good life, trying to be a good person, to try and get my life back in order and to try and help people with my story and or to talk with other survivors to help them with their stories. And I guess for me, just the conspiracy rabbit hole, I've done that so completely, into the world where there's reptilians and I was raped by reptilians and like that ex extreme side of it. I'm just really hesitant to kind of go down that pathway again. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And none of us talk about any of these things to judge you or anybody who speaks about it. It's important that
Yeah,
we look at every aspect of this
yeah,
because that helps us create a more whole picture when we can get different puzzle pieces that fit to the same
mm,
puzzle that are
mm,
completely different colors, that are completely different, aspects of it, parts of the
yeah,
picture. And so your perspective is really important. And honestly, perspectives like that they give me hope because sometimes I become really hopeless hearing some of
uh,
these stories and people, you know, testifying how a high-level politician perpetrated them or a high-level
yeah,
lawyer or how a court worked with this person and this person to help conceal a case. So you see so much when you're, diving into this stuff all the time. You see so much darkness that sometimes it does become all consuming and you think, gosh, every
mm,
single person out there
mm,
is, in these high levels is bad. But
mm,
it gives me a lot of hope to hear the opposite. And I've heard that also multiple times that there were people in positions of power to help that did or tried, and
yeah,
that they weren't, they're still working in those positions or they worked in them for an entire career. And so when you hear this, you hear that to me, I hear that there's also people out there who are working to do good, who actually do care and
yeah,
who are balancing out the darkness with the good that they're doing, and that there's pockets of good that are also working together to help expose stuff and to help survivors, to help victims, that actually do care. And I also have come to a belief of that in my heart too, that there is a balance. Of course, there's going to be conspiracy in government. Anytime you put, powerful people together and entice them with money and, like you said, lobbying and, different positions that can give them authority over people. That's always a tug of war game that we played since the beginning of time. There's no shortage of history of hierarchy and people wanting to climb to the top of that at any means possible, of course. But I think we also have to balance that by also seeing the good and looking for that because those are the people and that's going to be our way out. We're not going to get anywhere if our perspective is just, oh, we just gotta, wipe this off our hands. It's done. It's hopeless. I can't do anything else but sit on my couch. Doom and gloom. Like we're just going to the straight to the apocalypse and there's nothing we can do about it. This
Yeah,
is a way to stay proactive, to stay grounded, and to
yeah.
also realize that like we're a good person, no matter what the people listening to this, like you're all in different career paths. You all know and have family members that are doing good in different, institutions of society. And I think too, we need to focus on the good around us, the people around us that we know for sure are doing good and to be a witness to that. And then to help us, see that elsewhere and to know that there's pockets elsewhere that are also conspiring for the good of humanity. It's not just all, a satanic conspiracy, like you said. There are good people out there. It's just, unfortunately, a lot of times with the way that our world and propaganda and the news, like we're shown all the bad stuff because there's mind control with what we consume by design. They want, we're in a constant state of low vibration because our news has turned into propaganda, and there's a lot of really bad things that we hear about every day. We don't always hear about all the good, but I
Mm,
think that's where we really connect to humanity is when we're connecting with the good in our homes and our communities, on our state levels, in our states, in the world, and looking at things holistically of separating it, realizing that there's corruption and there's conspiracy and there's bad things in every facet of society and every institution. Also, on the other hand, there's good and there's people fighting for good and there's people who will fight to the death, to help bring justice to injustices in the world and who have a strong moral compass. And I love that your story helps balance that for us. And I know for me, it restores my faith, and gives me these glimmers of hope and brings me back to those suns and those balls of lights in the pictures that you showed earlier.
mm. Oh, thank you, Anna. Yeah, yeah, I do. I think there's a lot to be said, and this is especially as a survivor, or even if you're someone who's quite caught up in the conspiracy world or in, the satanic pedophile theory and yeah, you know, behind the world government kind of thing. And it's just focusing on your life and your own sphere of influence, I think, which you said much more eloquently and beautifully than than I'm saying. But just as Emma said, just focusing on the goodness, focusing on relationships that are close to you, finding the right kind of people, supporting, other survivors, learning how to support survivors. There is so much goodness in the world, and there is so much goodness in us as a people. There's a lot of darkness as well, but I think one of the a danger of looking into conspiracy is that it can become all consuming and it can become very dark and very without an end, as you say, which oh, we'll just wait for the apocalypse then. Or like me, you start to think you're the initiator of the apocalypse. And again, I would just come back to, can you hold a position of nuance? Can you retain connection to your critical mind? And can you have some hope as well? And there's so many good things. There's so many good people out there, including in all of these institutions. There's legitimate conspiracies. There's the MK Ultra, like that's a documented, that's a real thing, that our governments have done. So I'm not saying it's all sunshine and rainbows, but to stay sane or to stay healthy, we need to focus on what's good as well, at least as well, and
Absolutely.
don't don't let it make you dark or bitter or without hope. Is what I would say.
If survivors are going through this currently, or say they're listening and think that could be a
Mm,
possibility as they may recover more memories, or it could be down the road for them that could lead them to that.
mm.
Besides psych wards and jail, which is like you said, where we want to prevent people from going, do you have any tips or tools that you would recommend to survivors that maybe helped you in those moments, that they can sort of maybe keep as a preventative measure or in their toolbox if and when something like that happens to them?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I think having a good therapist, if you can afford it, is a godsend. Somebody that is sympathetic and experienced with sexual abuse is very, very helpful. Um, I think the main tips that we've given on critical mind and nuance, I think is very helpful. If you're in this position now, or if you're going through this, and I mean, look, my inbox is always open. So if you are a survivor watching this and you feel you need to reach out to somebody, like feel free to get in contact with me through my website, and I will try and respond as appropriately and as helpfully as I can. But obviously, I can't. Um, if it's thousands and thousands, that might be a little bit of a struggle, but I would try. It's really difficult when you're going through it because if you can't afford a therapist, there's very few people that are experienced with this. To be honest, I mean, your podcast, Emma, I think is an amazing resource. Um, so I would lean on Emma and her offering. I would look up just good therapists that deal with childhood trauma on YouTube. Um, Speak with other survivors, connect with other survivors. But really, just the heart of my message is what would have saved me when I was going through the mill is if I could have just held that position of nuance and reclaimed my critical mind and not got swept up in the first experience or got swept up in my intuition at the expense of my critical mind. For me, that was really the key. And that's the antidote to psychosis. Um, so yeah, does that answer?
Absolutely, yes. That was a
Yeah.
great answer. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Was there anything else that you wanted to add to this conversation or talk about regarding psychosis or even your blog entries that we talked about?
Mm, not really. No, just how much I appreciate you, Emma, and just I think you're so intelligent and well versed in these topics and so compassionate. It's really, and you're such an advocate. Like I always feel Emma's just advocacy for me, just her support and I always feel lifted and buoyed up by you. So I just, and with your other interviews as well, you're just such a bright light. So thank you to Emma. And I just would like to say, dear viewers, just thank you for taking an interest in this topic. If you're a fellow survivor, my heart goes out to you. I'm so, so sorry for whatever it is that you've suffered to whatever degree. It is all beyond the pale. It is all evil and wicked. And to survive it makes you, by definition, a hero. And it makes you a survivor and a warrior. And I take my proverbial hat off to you. I bow my head and I just want you to know that you're loved and that it wasn't meant to be this way. Um, if we can do the work to heal, life can become bearable. It can even become good. Um, but we have to work at it. We have to work at it. It's not our responsibility what was done to us, but but to heal is our responsibility. And part of that healing process is boundaries, and part of that healing process is helping others. So I expect to see you out there sometime soon.
Amen. That's beautiful. And, all of us are so blessed that we get to learn from you, Daniel, and that we get to see you on the other side of what you went through. It's so unbearable hearing what you went through because I just look at who you are today and it's like, gosh, I can't picture you and anybody, violating you the way that you were. It's just
Mm,
heinous to think about, but to see the the effects of your healing and to see where you're at today.
mm,
Man, like if people don't believe in miracles, they just need to listen to one of these interviews and they'll see one right in front of their eyes. Because man, it is a freaking miracle to see you here smiling today, articulating these really hard things, making sense of these completely incomprehensible things that you went through, and being able to convey that in a way that's both healing and educational. We're better for you, Daniel, and your story has impacted so many already. I'm so thrilled to hear that you're working on this fiction series with your story and involving, parts of it to help educate people while also, giving them something that's meant for entertainment too at the same time. I think fiction is a great avenue for people to go. I've seen more and more survivors taking that avenue versus solely writing a memoir because you can appeal to a wider audience and, share truth in a way that keeps people engaged. Sometimes fiction, even if it's the same thing, but it's labeled fiction,
Mm.
um, people can tolerate it a little bit more than actually, taking in that their first time experiencing this, that it's nonfiction. So I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I can't wait to see, the end result of this, and can't wait to see the other things that you're working on behind the scenes come into fruition. Um, but for people listening, you did mention that they could contact you. I want to just recap your website if you want to share a little bit about that, and then also your YouTube channel where you share your full testimony, give tons of hours of content for us, including the ab reaction videos that we briefly covered in one of our episodes that we did together. And so I wanted you to share where people can find you and connect with you.
Okay, thank you, Emma. Yeah, so my website is Survivors Story. So survivors with an S, then it's got a dash, and then story.com. So that is my website. Probably could have been Survivor Stories or any other combination of words, but that was the URL that was available. So that's what it was. Um, Yeah, it's got a really good resources page, guys. So actually talking about things, if you're struggling at the moment, if you go to the resources page, there are some excellent, including the CSA Survivors blog, the excellent article, Paedophiles No Disassociation to You, essential reading, and some other really, really helpful resources there for you. I think the blog's, dare I say it, pretty good. And also on the homepage, there is what do we got here? We got some essential resources. So the CSA Survivors blog and the Paedophiles No Dissociation article, and also a speech from Annika Lucas, who is a hero of mine and a very inspirational lady and survivor. So that's the website. On the contact page, the contact form wasn't working, so I had people message me that didn't get through. But now, if you go to that contact page, there is an email address, which I won't say out loud. But if you want to go there, or just drop me an email, you're really, really welcome to. And I will reply in as timely a fashion as I'm able to with other commitments that I have. But particularly if you're a survivor or if you know a survivor, I would love to hear from you. And then my YouTube channel, let's have a look, is on Emma's. So it's at Survivors Story. And at the moment, there's only 3 videos on there. I've been meaning to do more, but there's just been other things I'm prioritizing at the moment. But the 3 videos is part 1 is talking about my story of abuse. Part 2 is talking about my incarceration, my breakdown into psychosis and my recovery. And then part 3 is probably the most potentially disturbing of all, shows body flashback footage from the second MDMA treatment that I underwent in order to get these memories back. So it's very visceral. It's very long, but if you are going to watch it, I would ask you to watch it from the beginning all the way through. If you just click halfway through and just watch it, it's just going to look strange. If you watch it from the beginning, you'll see how the body memories gradually unfurl and how they gradually take place, and it just makes a lot more sense, basically. So that's the YouTube channel. I'd love, yeah, please subscribe and comment and like and all that good stuff. As you should to Emma's channel.
And I'm so happy to see these videos. The views just keep going up and up every time you come on. So it's wonderful.
Mm,
More and more people are finding you and watching your content, hopefully engaging with you. And that also warms my heart that people are reaching out to you. Survivors are connecting with you. And like he said, he has an open invitation for you guys to connect with him. So please be patient, you guys. A lot of us that are out here advocating, we have full-time jobs, other obligations in life. And, we do our advocacy when we can fit it into our schedules, which sometimes can be a lot and other times can be a little spacey depending on, what's going on. So if you do reach out to him, have patience. I've known Daniel to be very responsive, but I also know he has a lot in his life, just like I do. And sometimes, things can happen. So if you do reach out to Daniel or anybody, that offers that, just please have patience with them and allow them to get back whenever it works. And if you don't hear from them, it could have went to spam. So reach out again, if you don't hear after a couple of weeks, just to make sure that it actually went to their inbox. So that'll be on the contact page. The email's there. Just copy and paste it into your email and connect with him. Daniel will be doing more interviews on his channel with survivors too. So if this is something you'd be interested in, is connecting with him and potentially creating content, reach out to him. That way you guys can book something in the future together and, connect and meet. And you guys can, have a part in helping build up Daniel's YouTube too, whenever the time permits that more video content can be created. So Daniel, just thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your blog. I know that these memories and these things that you write are very, very specific. They're very vulnerable. They're very deep and they're very true. They're not sugar coated. And so I love that you shared some of those with us and that you have created so many different blogs for us to read and just your vulnerability as you speak as a interviewee and even on your channel as somebody being interviewed, and those videos are incredible. I definitely encourage you guys to go subscribe to his YouTube. But just thank you for everything you're doing out there. I know that this does take a lot of time, takes a lot of energy. It can be traumatic reliving a lot of this stuff and talking about it. And you're also bearing your soul to us. You're talking about these very vulnerable moments in your life and very vulnerable things that people go through that aren't commonly talked about openly. So just thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a safe space for us to learn and for being a landing pad for these really difficult and sometimes taboo topics and for helping validate and give a voice to so many people who maybe can't talk about this stuff to the people in their lives and feel very alone and isolated with these experiences. You really bring a comfort and that feeling that your article, The Golden Ones, you help give that sense of home and that you're that bright light for a lot of other people. So I just thank you from the bottom of my heart.
And all of the growth on my YouTube channel is because of you. So, so thank you.
You're just getting started too. I can't wait for more and more people to find those videos. And you guys can see little snippets of it. If you go back in my library, like I said, Daniel's playlist, go watch his part 1 and 2 on my channel. There's a little snippet of some of his YouTube content on the ab reaction video, the part 3 he was talking about. But I definitely encourage you guys. I feel like that is a must watch for everybody if this is something that you're passionate about on the other side. If you have survivors in your life, if you work with survivors, every therapist should watch that, or any person that's working directly with survivors should go watch that part 3 video. It is very, very hard to watch, but it's also very, very educational and empowering to have an understanding of something that most of us who didn't go through extreme trauma will never experience, remembering and having our bodies react in these same ways. So it's fascinating in a lot of ways to learn what our bodies are capable of, how trauma's stored, and also how we heal from it, that this isn't somebody going crazy. This isn't somebody falling into a mental disorder. They're not schizophrenic. Our bodies literally can store memories, and have different ways to do that in our mind. And so it's very fascinating how the body keeps the score and also how we can heal from that by releasing it, and what that looks like. So please go support Daniel, you guys. I'm going to have all of his information down below in the show notes and the description. I'll have his YouTube channel linked. I will have his blog and his website linked. And like I said, you guys can connect with him from there and copy and paste his email into your browser and shoot him an email. Please go support him. Every subscription on YouTube, it might not seem a lot for you, but for a creator that tends to get maybe shadow banned or that doesn't have material that's really heavily accepted on these platforms, it can be night and day of helping other people find it if we can help these algorithms pick up these channels that have this type of content. So I'll have all my information below too, you guys. Reach out to me as well if you guys want to be a guest on the podcast. Follow me on different social media platforms. Follow me on YouTube, Rumble, anywhere you guys can, just in case something happens on one platform, we can connect on another. So you guys, we couldn't do this without you. I thank you guys with all my heart. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.